Now you'll become lion food, you useless old woman, my daughter-in-law said as she pushed me out of the car during a safari in Africa. My son just laughed. I was about to transfer $12 million into their account, but subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The dust cloud from our safari vehicle was still settling when I heard Olivia's voice cut through the African heat like a blade. Now you're going to become lion food, you useless old woman. Her hands pressed against my shoulders, shoving me out of the open-sided Jeep with a force that sent me stumbling onto the red dirt. My 62-year-old body hit the ground hard, my safari hat tumbling away as I struggled to catch my balance. The sound that followed will haunt me forever. My son Marcus's laughter. Not shock, not concern for his mother who had just been pushed from a moving vehicle in the middle of the African wilderness. Laughter. I looked up from where I had fallen, my palms scraped and burning, to see their faces framed by the Jeep's canvas top. Olivia wore that smile, the one I had convinced myself was affectionate for the past 3 years, but now recognized as pure malice. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't have a strand out of place despite the bumpy ride, and her designer safari outfit looked like it had just come off a magazine shoot. Everything about her was calculated, including this moment. Marcus sat beside her, my own flesh and blood, 34 years old and grinning like a schoolboy who had just pulled off the perfect prank. His father's eyes, the ones I used to see warmth in, now looked at me with something I couldn't name. Disgust? Impatience? Relief? Marcus, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the engine that was already beginning to pull away. Son, please. He shrugged, actually shrugged, as if abandoning his mother in lion territory was no more significant than leaving a tip at a restaurant. You should have thought about that before becoming such a burden, Mom. The Jeep lurched forward, leaving me in a cloud of red dust and diesel fumes. I watched it disappear around a bend in the dirt road, taking with it the 2 people I had trusted most in this world. The silence that followed was deafening. No engine noise, no human voices, just the distant call of some bird I couldn't identify and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat there on the ground for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, trying to process what had just happened. This morning, I had woken up in our luxury-tented camp, excited about our final day of safari before returning to the States. I had been planning to transfer $12 million to Marcus and Olivia's account. As soon as we got back home, money they said they needed for an investment opportunity that would secure our family's future for generations. $12 million. My late husband Robert's life insurance, our combined retirement savings, the proceeds from selling the family business. Everything we had worked for over 40 years of marriage. And I had been ready to hand it over because Marcus was my son, and Olivia was family now, and family takes care of each other. The irony wasn't lost on me as I struggled to my feet, brushing the red African dirt from my khaki pants. Here I was, about to make them millionaires, and they had literally thrown me to the lions. I began walking in the direction our vehicle had gone, my legs shaky but determined. The sun was brutal, and I could feel sweat beginning to soak through my cotton shirt. Every shadow between the acacia trees made me freeze, listening for sounds that might indicate I wasn't alone out here. The guide had told us just yesterday that this area had a resident pride of lions, a family group that often moved through during the late afternoon hours. Late afternoon. I glanced at my watch, 3:15 p.m. Exactly when lions began their evening hunt. As I walked, memories began flooding back with painful clarity. How had I missed the signs? The way Olivia's eyes would narrow slightly when she thought I wasn't looking. The way Marcus had become increasingly impatient with my questions about their business ventures. The subtle comments about how I was getting forgetful, how I repeated stories, how maybe I should consider simplifying my life. 3 months ago, Olivia had suggested this African safari as a family bonding experience, before making any major financial decisions. She had booked everything, chosen the most expensive packages, insisted on private guides and luxury accommodations. At the time, I thought it was thoughtful, my daughter-in-law wanting to create beautiful memories with her husband's mother. Now I understood it differently. They had brought me to one of the most remote places on Earth, somewhere accidents happened, where an elderly woman might simply disappear without too many questions asked. The $12 million would pass to Marcus as my sole heir, and Olivia would finally have everything she had been working toward for 3 years. I had been walking for nearly an hour when I heard the sound of an engine approaching from behind. My heart raced. Were they coming back? Had they realized their mistake? Or were they returning to finish what they had started? The vehicle that appeared around the bend wasn't our safari jeep. It was a different company's truck, packed with tourists who looked shocked to see a lone woman walking along the remote road. The guide, a weathered man named Joseph, immediately pulled over. "Madam, what are you doing out here alone?" His accent was thick but his English was clear. His face creased with genuine concern. I must have looked like a mess, dusty, sweaty, probably wild-eyed from the shock of what had happened. "My family," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "They left me." Joseph's passengers, a young couple from Germany, immediately began offering water and shade. The woman, who couldn't have been more than 25, looked horrified as I explained what had happened. Her boyfriend kept shaking his head and muttering something in German that sounded angry. "This is not right," Joseph said firmly as he helped me into the truck. "We take you back to camp immediately. The authorities must be notified." As we drove back toward the main camp, I found myself thinking about that moment when Olivia pushed me from the jeep. The calculating look in her eyes, the way she had positioned herself for maximum leverage. It hadn't been a moment of anger or frustration. It had been planned, practiced maybe. She had known exactly how much force to use, exactly where to place her hands. And Marcus had been ready for it. Ready to drive away. Ready to laugh. Ready to leave his mother behind without a second thought. The German woman, Sarah, she told me her name was, kept patting my hand and offering me water. She and her boyfriend Klaus were on their honeymoon, she explained, and they couldn't understand how anyone could treat their mother this way. Their kindness felt foreign after months of subtle cruelty disguised as care. "You must call the police," Sarah insisted. "This is attempted murder." But was it? Could I prove that Olivia and Marcus had intended for something to happen to me out there? Or would it look like the paranoid imaginings of an elderly woman who had become confused during a stressful travel situation? I could already hear Olivia's voice, sweet and concerned, explaining to authorities how I had become disoriented and jumped from the vehicle despite their attempts to stop me. By the time we reached the main camp, word had already spread about the incident. The camp manager, a stern-looking woman named Patricia, was waiting with a worried expression and a satellite phone. But before she could speak, I saw them, Marcus and Olivia, sitting at the bar area, drinks in hand, looking for all the world like a couple enjoying their vacation. They turned when they heard the commotion of our arrival, and the expressions that crossed their faces told me everything I needed to know. Surprise, yes, but not the relief you would expect from family members whose loved one had just been found safe. Instead, I saw something that chilled me more than the African night air. Disappointment. The flight back to Chicago felt like the longest 18 hours of my life. I sat in my first-class seat, the same upgrade Olivia had insisted on booking for all of us, staring out at the endless expanse of clouds and trying to make sense of what had happened in the past 48 hours. Marcus and Olivia sat 3 rows ahead of me. I could see the backs of their heads, occasionally leaning together in whispered conversation. When the camp manager had questioned them about the incident, they had performed beautifully. Olivia's eyes had filled with tears as she explained how I had become confused and agitated during the game drive, how I had insisted on getting out despite their protests, how terrified they had been when they couldn't find me. Marcus had nodded along, adding details about how I had been acting strange lately, forgetting conversations, repeating myself. He painted a picture of a concerned son worried about his mother's declining mental state, forced to make difficult decisions about her care and safety. I had sat there listening to them rewrite history in real time, watching the camp staff's expressions shift from suspicion to sympathy. By the end of their performance, Patricia was patting Olivia's hand and assuring her that these things happen sometimes with elderly travelers, that the stress of exotic locations could be overwhelming for senior minds. The German couple, Sarah and Klaus, had tried to speak up, to tell their version of finding me walking alone on a remote road with clear handprints on my shoulders where I had been pushed. But their English wasn't perfect, and Marcus had smoothly redirected the conversation toward my medical history and his concerns about early-onset dementia. Sitting on that plane, I replayed every interaction from the past 3 years, seeing them now through a different lens. How Olivia had gradually taken over management of my household, insisting it was too much for me to handle alone. How she had suggested I stop driving at night because my reflexes weren't what they used to be. How she had slowly isolated me from my longtime friends, claiming they were taking advantage of my generosity or gossiping about our family. I remembered the day she had convinced me to give her power of attorney for emergencies. She had brought homemade cookies and her laptop, sitting at my kitchen table with documents that she explained would just make things easier if something ever happened to me. I had signed without really reading them, trusting my daughter-in-law to have my best interests at heart. That same kitchen table where, just last month, we had discussed the $12 million transfer. Olivia had spread out investment brochures and bank statements, explaining how Marcus's business partner had found an incredible opportunity in renewable energy. The returns would be substantial, she promised, enough to fund my comfortable retirement while growing the family wealth for future generations. We just need to move quickly, she had said, her manicured finger tracing the projected earnings charts. These opportunities don't last long, and we want to make sure you're taken care of, Susan. You know how much we love you. I had felt so grateful that day. Grateful to have a son who included me in his business decisions, grateful for a daughter-in-law who cared about my financial security. I had agreed to transfer the money as soon as we returned from our African adventure, our last hurrah, as an extended family before Marcus and Olivia started having children and their priorities shifted. Children. I wondered now if they had ever really planned to have children, or if that had been another lie designed to keep me invested in their future. Olivia was 31 years old and had been married to my son for 3 years. Every time I gently asked about grandchildren, she would touch her flat stomach and smile mysteriously, saying they were working on it, but wanted to be financially secure first. The flight attendant offered me another glass of wine, and I accepted it gratefully. The alcohol helped dull the sharp edges of the memories that kept surfacing, like the time 6 months ago when I had fallen down the stairs at home. Stairs that had never given me trouble before. Stairs where someone had left a thick book right where I always stepped. Olivia had been so concerned, so caring, suggesting maybe I shouldn't live alone anymore. Maybe it was time to consider assisted living. Or the incident with my medication 3 months ago. I had been taking the same blood pressure pills for 5 years without problem, but suddenly I was getting dizzy spells, falling asleep at odd times during the day. When I mentioned it to my doctor, he had been confused. My prescription had been changed to a much stronger dosage. When I asked Olivia about it, since she often picked up my medications, she had looked concerned and suggested that maybe I was getting confused about my pills, maybe I needed someone to help manage them for me. The dizziness had stopped when I quietly switched back to my original dosage without telling anyone. I thought about my friend Margaret, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. She had called me repeatedly after our bridge group disbanded, wanting to know why I had suddenly stopped participating in activities I had enjoyed for decades. I had been too embarrassed to tell her the truth, that Olivia had convinced me the other women were jealous of my financial situation, that they were using me for my generosity, that I would be happier focusing on family instead of fair-weather friends. Margaret had left increasingly concerned voicemails, finally showing up at my house one afternoon when Olivia happened to be there. I still remembered the cold politeness in my daughter-in-law's voice as she explained that I was going through a difficult time and needed to limit stressful interactions with people who didn't understand my situation. Margaret had looked confused and hurt, but she had left. She stopped calling after that. Now, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, I realized that Margaret had been trying to save me from something she couldn't even name. She had sensed that something was wrong, that I was disappearing from my own life, but she couldn't have imagined the systematic way I was being isolated and manipulated. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts list. So many names I hadn't called in months, people who had been part of my life for years before Olivia decided they weren't good for me. My book club, my volunteering group at the hospital, my neighbors who used to stop by for coffee. All of them gradually pushed away by someone who claimed to be protecting me. The plane hit turbulence and I gripped my armrest, thinking about how precarious my situation had become without me even realizing it. If Olivia and Marcus had succeeded in their plan, if something had happened to me in Africa, who would have questioned it? I lived alone, had no close friends anymore, had been successfully painted as a confused elderly woman whose judgment couldn't be trusted. The $12 million would have passed to Marcus immediately. There would have been a lovely funeral, with Olivia playing the grieving daughter-in-law who had tried so hard to care for me in my final years. They would have told stories about my adventurous spirit and how I had insisted on taking risks despite their concerns. They would have inherited my house, my investments, everything Robert and I had built over a lifetime of work and careful planning. And they would have lived happily ever after on the foundation of my bones. The plane began its descent into Chicago, and I watched the familiar skyline come into view. In a few hours I would be back in my own home, the house where Robert and I had raised Marcus, where I had welcomed Olivia as a daughter 3 years ago. They would expect me to go through with the money transfer, to sign the papers and hand over my future to people who had literally tried to feed me to lions. But something had changed during those long hours of flight, somewhere between the shock of betrayal and the clarity of wine-enhanced reflection. I was not the confused, dependent old woman they had spent 3 years creating. I was Susan Patricia Kellerman, 62 years old, with a sharp mind and a suddenly very clear understanding of exactly who I was dealing with. As we touched down on American soil, I made a decision that would have surprised the woman who had boarded this plane in Johannesburg. I was not going to confront them directly. I was not going to make accusations or demands or emotional appeals to their better nature. Instead, I was going to play their game. But this time I would be the one setting the rules. 3 days after returning from Africa, I sat across from Marcus and Olivia at my dining room table, the same mahogany table where Robert and I had shared countless family dinners. The irony wasn't lost on me that this piece of furniture, which had witnessed so many moments of genuine love and connection, was now the stage for the most elaborate deception of my life. "I've been thinking about our conversation before the trip," I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound slightly uncertain, slightly fragile. "About the investment opportunity." Olivia's eyes lit up immediately, though she tried to hide her eagerness behind a mask of gentle concern. "Oh, Susan, are you sure you're feeling up to discussing business? You've seemed so tired since we got back." Of course I seemed tired. I had spent the past 3 days conducting the most important research of my life while pretending to recover from travel fatigue and the confusion of what happened in Africa. While they thought I was napping each afternoon, I had been making phone calls, conducting internet searches, and slowly piecing together the truth about my son and daughter-in-law's real situation. "I'm fine," I said, allowing a slight tremor in my voice. "Just eager to get things settled so I can rest easier knowing our family's future is secure." Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest in the way it had been since childhood when he wanted something badly. "Mom, there's no pressure. If you're having second thoughts." "No second thoughts," I interrupted, perhaps a bit too quickly. I saw Olivia's eyes narrow slightly, and I immediately softened my tone. "It's just that $12 million is a lot of money. I want to make sure I understand everything correctly." For the next hour, they walked me through their presentation again. The renewable energy company that needed investors. The projected returns that seemed almost too good to be true. The urgency of moving quickly before other investors claimed the opportunity. I asked questions that made me sound cautious but not suspicious. Questions about timelines and paperwork, and what would happen to my monthly income during the investment period. Throughout the conversation, I watched their body language, noting how Olivia's foot tapped impatiently under the table when I asked for clarification, how Marcus's jaw tightened when I mentioned wanting to speak to his business partner directly. "Actually," I said as they prepared to leave, "I'd love to meet this partner of yours, Marcus. James, was it? I'd feel more comfortable hearing about the opportunity from him personally." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds too long. I watched Marcus and Olivia exchange a look that they thought I missed, one of those silent communications between married couples that can convey volumes. "James is traveling right now," Marcus said finally. "Actually, that's part of why we need to move quickly. He's in Germany meeting with the renewable energy executives, and the window for investment closes when he gets back next week." "Oh," I said, nodding as if this made perfect sense. "Well, perhaps I could speak with him by phone? I'm sure he wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to reassure an elderly investor." Another look passed between them. Olivia's smile never wavered, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that I had learned to recognize over the past 3 years. "Of course, Susan," she said smoothly. "I'll have Marcus get his contact information for you. We want you to feel completely comfortable with this decision." After they left, I sat in my living room and reviewed what I had learned during my 3 days of investigation. The renewable energy company existed, but it was a small startup with no connection to any business partner named James. Marcus's supposed business ventures, which I had always assumed were successful based on his expensive clothes and frequent vacations, were actually a series of failures that had left him deeply in debt. The private investigator I had hired, a discreet man named Detective Rodriguez who came highly recommended by my lawyer, had provided me with a comprehensive report that painted a picture of financial desperation I never could have imagined. Marcus owed nearly $300,000 to various creditors, including some that Rodriguez warned me were not the kind of people who accept late payments gracefully. Olivia's spending habits were even more revealing. Credit card statements showed purchases at luxury retailers that totaled more than most people's annual salaries. Designer handbags that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Spa treatments, expensive dinners, weekend trips to exotic locations. All financed by credit lines that were now maxed out and in default. But the most chilling discovery was hidden in the depths of their internet search history, which Rodriguez had somehow managed to access through methods I preferred not to know about. Searches for inheritance laws, life insurance policies for elderly parents, and signs of dementia in older adults painted a picture of premeditation that made my blood run cold. There were also searches for accidents in Africa, lion attack statistics, and liability for tourist deaths in safari settings. They had been planning this for months, possibly years. The African safari hadn't been a spontaneous family bonding experience. It had been a carefully orchestrated attempt to eliminate me in a way that would look accidental and wouldn't trigger extensive investigation by American authorities. The most disturbing discovery came when Rodriguez showed me printed emails between Marcus and Olivia discussing the Susan problem and various solutions they had considered. They had looked into nursing homes where I might suffer accidents, considered ways to increase my medication doses to cause natural complications, and even discussed the possibility of causing a car accident that would look like senior driver error. The safari plan had appealed to them because it was so far from home, in a country where wealthy tourists sometimes disappeared without extensive investigation, where predator attacks were common enough to seem plausible, and where their grief would be unquestioned by authorities eager to avoid international incidents. I held those printed emails in my hands, reading my son's words about his mother as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved, and felt something inside me die that could never be resurrected. But along with the death of my illusions came the birth of something else. A cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity and clarity. They wanted to play games with an old woman's life and money? They had picked the wrong old woman. That evening I called my lawyer, Patricia Hendricks, who had handled Robert's estate and had been managing my legal affairs for over 15 years. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s who had built her practice representing clients who needed protection from family members who saw them as bank accounts rather than people. "Susan," she said when I explained why I was calling, "I have to tell you I've been worried about some of the documents you've signed recently. That power of attorney arrangement with your daughter-in-law raised some red flags for me." I felt a chill of recognition. What kind of red flags? The scope is very broad, much broader than most people realize when they sign these things. Essentially, Olivia has the legal authority to make financial decisions on your behalf, if she can demonstrate that you're mentally incompetent to do so yourself. And the standard for proving incompetence isn't as high as most people think. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The forgetfulness they had been documenting, the confusion about my medication, the agitation and erratic behavior they had reported to the safari camp manager. They had been building a case for my mental incompetence, gathering evidence that could be used to have me declared unable to manage my own affairs. If the African plan had failed, they had a backup strategy. They could have me committed to a care facility, take control of my finances through the power of attorney, and slowly drain my accounts while keeping me medicated and compliant in a nursing home of their choosing. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the fury burning in my chest, "I need you to draft some new documents for me. Tonight if possible. And I need them to be absolutely ironclad." "What kind of documents?" "The kind that are going to teach my family that underestimating a 62-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of their lives." As I hung up the phone and began planning my next moves, I thought about something my late husband Robert used to say about business negotiations. The person who holds the real power is the one who's willing to walk away from the table, he would tell me. Everyone else is just bluffing. Marcus and Olivia thought they held all the cards because they had isolated me, manipulated me, and convinced everyone around us that I was a declining old woman who needed their protection and guidance. What they didn't realize was that I was about to walk away from their table entirely. And when I did, I would be taking everything with me. 2 weeks after my conversation with Patricia, I was ready. The legal documents were prepared, signed, and safely filed in 3 separate locations. My financial accounts had been quietly restructured in ways that would become apparent only when someone tried to access them. And most importantly, I had perfected my performance as the trusting, slightly confused elderly mother who was eager to secure her family's future. I called Marcus on a Thursday morning, making my voice sound slightly breathless with excitement. "Sweetheart, I've made my decision about the investment. I'd like to move forward as soon as possible." The relief in his voice was palpable. "That's wonderful, Mom. I know this is going to be great for all of us. Should I come over this afternoon to help you with the paperwork?" "Actually," I said, allowing a note of nervousness to creep into my tone, "I was hoping we could make it a proper family dinner. Something special to celebrate this new chapter for our family. Would Saturday evening work? I could make that pot roast you always loved as a boy." I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. "That sounds perfect. Should I bring anything?" "Just Olivia and your appetite," I said warmly. "Oh, and maybe you could bring those investment documents we discussed? I'd love to review everything one more time before we make it official." After hanging up, I spent the afternoon preparing for what would be the most important performance of my life. I had learned, through my weeks of careful observation and Detective Rodriguez's thorough investigation, that Marcus and Olivia had already spent a significant portion of my money in their minds. They had looked at luxury condominiums, put deposits down on expensive cars, and even begun planning an extended European vacation to celebrate their successful investment. The pressure of their mounting debts and the promises they had made to creditors meant they were desperate for this money transfer to happen quickly. Rodriguez had informed me that some of Marcus's debts were to people who didn't accept excuses or delays, which explained the increasing tension I had noticed in my son over the past few months. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather. I spent the morning cooking, filling my house with the aromas of the comfort foods I had made for Marcus throughout his childhood. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade bread, green bean casserole, and apple pie for dessert. The same meal I had served for his 16th birthday, his high school graduation, and the night he brought Olivia home to meet me for the first time. As I cooked, I found myself remembering that first dinner with Olivia 3.5 years ago. She had been charming, complimenting everything from my cooking to my home decor to the family photos lining the hallway. She had asked thoughtful questions about Robert, shown genuine interest in our family history, and made Marcus laugh in ways I hadn't seen since his father died. I had been so grateful that my son had found someone who made him happy, someone who seemed to understand the importance of family and tradition. Looking back now, I realized that even then, she had been studying us, learning our weaknesses and vulnerabilities, figuring out exactly what buttons to push to get what she wanted. By 5:30, everything was ready. The dining room table was set with my best china and crystal, the same set Robert had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary. Candles flickered in the silver candlesticks that had belonged to my grandmother. Classical music played softly in the background. Everything looked perfect for a celebration of family trust and togetherness. Marcus and Olivia arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, both dressed more formally than usual. Marcus wore a suit I had never seen before, expensive-looking and perfectly tailored. Olivia was in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill, with jewelry that caught the candlelight in sparkly flashes of gold and diamonds. "Mom, this looks incredible," Marcus said, kissing my cheek as he handed me a bottle of wine that I recognized as costing over $200. "You've really outdone yourself." Olivia embraced me warmly, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. "Susan, you sweet woman. All this trouble just for us? You're going to make me cry." I noticed she was carrying a leather portfolio, undoubtedly containing the documents they expected me to sign tonight. Documents that would transfer $12 million into accounts they controlled, effectively ending my financial independence and leaving me completely dependent on their generosity and good intentions. Generosity and good intentions they had already proven they didn't possess. We sat down to dinner, and for nearly an hour the conversation was pleasant and familiar. They complimented my cooking, shared stories about their recent activities, and generally played the role of loving family members perfectly. If I hadn't known what I knew, if I hadn't felt Olivia's hands pushing me out of that safari vehicle, I might have been completely convinced by their performance. As I served dessert, Marcus cleared his throat and glanced at Olivia, who nodded encouragingly. "Mom," he began, his voice taking on that serious tone he used when discussing important matters, "we brought the paperwork for the investment opportunity. I know you're excited to move forward, but I want you to know there's no pressure. If you have any last-minute concerns or questions, we can wait." I could see the tension in his jaw as he said those last words, the effort it took to offer a delay when every instinct was probably screaming at him to get my signature tonight, before I could change my mind or ask too many questions. "Oh no," I said quickly, clasping my hands together with apparent enthusiasm. "I'm ready. I've been thinking about this constantly since we got back from Africa, and I know it's the right decision. I want to do this for our family's future." Olivia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Susan, you have no idea how much this means to us. The opportunity to secure not just your financial future, but Marcus's future, and hopefully our children's future someday. It's just incredible." Children. There was that word again. Dangled like a carrot in front of a grandmother who desperately wanted to believe she might have grandchildren to spoil and love. I smiled and squeezed her hand back, noting how cold her fingers felt despite the warm dining room. Marcus opened the leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table. Official-looking papers with bank letterheads and legal language that was designed to confuse and intimidate. I had already reviewed identical copies with Patricia, so I knew exactly what they contained: authorization forms for wire transfers, investment agreements that gave Marcus complete control over my money, and legal documents that would make it nearly impossible for me to reclaim my funds if I changed my mind. "The process is actually quite simple," Marcus explained, pointing to signature lines that had been highlighted in yellow. "Just a few signatures here and here, and we can initiate the transfer first thing Monday morning." I picked up my reading glasses and made a show of carefully reviewing each document, asking questions that demonstrated I was paying attention, but didn't reveal that I understood exactly what these papers really meant. "This clause here," I said, pointing to a section about transfer timelines, "it says the money will be moved immediately and invested within 72 hours. That seems very fast." "Time is crucial with this opportunity," Olivia explained smoothly. "The longer we wait, the greater the chance that other investors will claim the shares we've identified. We want to make sure you get the maximum return on your investment." I nodded thoughtfully and continued reading. With each question I asked, I could see them growing slightly more tense, slightly more eager to conclude this transaction and move on to spending their windfall. Finally, I set the papers down and looked at both of them with what I hoped appeared to be complete trust and affection. "You know," I said softly, "I keep thinking about what you said in Africa, Olivia, about how I was going to become lion food. It made me realize how precious and fragile life really is." I watched their faces carefully as I spoke. Marcus blinked rapidly, and Olivia's smile froze for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "Oh, Susan," Olivia said with a nervous laugh, "I was just joking around. You know how silly I get when I'm nervous about wild animals. I never meant anything by it." "Of course not," I agreed pleasantly. "But it did make me think about legacy, about what really matters when we're facing our mortality. And what matters is family, taking care of the people we love most." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Mom, that's exactly how we feel. This investment isn't just about money. It's about making sure you're taken care of, that your legacy continues to grow and benefit future generations." I smiled at him, my heart breaking a little as I looked at the face of the boy I had raised, the young man I had been so proud of, the adult who had become someone I no longer recognized. "Then let's make it official," I said, reaching for the pen. As I signed the first document, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. They thought they were watching me sign away my future, But what they were actually witnessing was the moment I took complete control of theirs. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I finished signing the last document. Marcus and Olivia sat across from me, barely containing their excitement as they watched me complete what they believed was the transfer of $12 million into their control. The candlelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows that seemed to reveal their true nature more clearly than daylight ever had. "There," I said, setting the pen down with a satisfied smile. "It's official. Our family's future is secure." Olivia immediately began gathering the papers, her movements quick and efficient. "Susan, you have no idea how happy this makes us. You're going to be so proud when you see the returns on this investment." Marcus stood up and came around the table to embrace me. "Mom, I know Dad would be proud of this decision. You're continuing his legacy of smart financial planning." The mention of Robert's name sent a sharp pain through my chest. My husband had worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years to build the security they were stealing from me. He had sacrificed vacations, hobbies, and countless evenings at home, so that I would never have to worry about money in my old age. And now his son was using his memory to justify theft. "Actually," I said, my voice remaining calm and pleasant, "I think it's time we had a completely honest conversation about legacies and family." Something in my tone made them both pause. Olivia's hand froze halfway to her purse, and Marcus straightened up, his expression shifting from jubilation to uncertainty. "What do you mean, Mom?" I stood up slowly, moving to the sideboard where I had placed a manila envelope earlier in the evening. "I mean, it's time to discuss what really happened in Africa, and what's been happening in this house for the past 3 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Olivia's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and Marcus looked like a deer caught in headlights. "I don't understand," Olivia said, but her voice had lost its warm, caring tone. It sounded flat now, mechanical. "Don't you?" I opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Let me help clarify things. These are bank statements showing that Marcus owes $297,000 to various creditors, including several who have made what my investigator calls credible threats regarding collection methods." Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I continued without giving him a chance to speak. "These are credit card statements showing that Olivia has spent over $400,000 in the past 18 months on luxury items, spa treatments, and vacations, all charged to accounts that are now in default." I pulled out another set of documents. "These are printed copies of internet searches conducted on your home computer. Searches for things like inheritance laws, life insurance policies for elderly parents, and my personal favorite, lion attack statistics in African safaris." Olivia started to stand up, but I held up my hand. "Sit down. I'm not finished." The authority in my voice surprised even me. She sat. "This," I said, holding up a final document, "is a transcript of recorded conversations between the two of you, discussing what you called the Susan problem, and various solutions you considered before settling on the African safari plan." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Marcus found his voice first. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my composure finally cracking slightly. "Explain how you pushed me out of a moving vehicle and left me to die in lion country? Explain how you've been systematically isolating me from my friends and convincing everyone I'm losing my mind? Explain how you've been planning my death for months so you could inherit my money." Olivia suddenly stood up, her mask completely dropped now. The sweet, caring daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "You meddling old bitch," she snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've cost us? We had everything planned perfectly, and you had to survive that stupid safari like some kind of cockroach." Marcus grabbed her arm. Olivia stopped talking. But she was beyond control now, years of pretending finally erupting into the open. "No. I'm done pretending to care about this pathetic old woman. I'm done listening to her boring stories and pretending her meatloaf doesn't taste like cardboard. I'm done acting grateful for hand-me-down jewelry and advice about marriage from someone whose husband was probably cheating on her for years." Each word hit like a physical blow, but I remained standing, my voice steady when I responded. "Are you finished?" "Finished?" Olivia laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. I'm just getting started. You want to know the truth, Susan? Your precious son has been stealing from you for 2 years. Those business expenses he needed help with? Gambling debts. That investment opportunity he told you about last Christmas? A scheme to flip houses that lost money from day one. I turned to look at Marcus, who was staring at the floor, his face flushed with shame and anger. And the best part, Olivia continued, is that none of this would have been necessary if you had just died when you were supposed to. Your husband's life insurance should have been enough to pay off Marcus's debts. But no, you had to keep on living and spending money on stupid things like groceries and utilities and medical care. That's enough, Marcus finally said, but his voice lacked any real authority. No, it's not enough, Olivia shot back. She's ruined everything. Those people Marcus owes money to don't accept excuses. They don't care about family loyalty or elderly mothers with trust issues. They want their money, and if they don't get it, they'll hurt you, I finished quietly. Both of them stared at me in surprise, as if they had forgotten I was still in the room. That's what this has all been about, hasn't it? You're not just greedy. You're desperate. You're scared. And you thought murdering me was easier than facing the consequences of your choices. Marcus finally looked up, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little boy he used to be, the child who would run to me when he was frightened or hurt. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by the cold calculation that had become his default expression when dealing with me. What do you want, Mom? Money. We'll pay you back every penny with interest. Just give us time to make this right. I almost laughed. After everything they had done, everything they had planned, he still thought this was a negotiation. I want you to leave, I said simply. Both of you. Now. You can't be serious, Olivia said. We just signed the investment documents. That money legally belongs to us now. I smiled for the first time since this conversation began. Actually, it doesn't. You see, those weren't real bank documents you signed. They were copies, very good copies, but completely worthless from a legal standpoint. The color drained from both of their faces as the implications sank in. The real documents, I continued, were signed 3 weeks ago. Documents that transferred my assets into an irrevocable trust managed by my attorney, with very specific instructions about distribution. Documents that effectively removed my wealth from your reach forever. Marcus stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. You can't do that. I'm your son. That money is my inheritance. Your inheritance, I said calmly, was contingent on treating me with love and respect. You chose a different path. I walked to the front door and opened it, the cool evening air rushing into the overheated dining room. You have 5 minutes to collect your things and leave. If you're still here when I call the police, I'll be pressing charges for attempted murder, elder abuse, and financial fraud. They stood frozen for a moment, as if unable to process that their carefully constructed plan had completely collapsed. Then Olivia grabbed her purse and the worthless documents, her movements jerky with rage and panic. This isn't over, she said as she stormed toward the door. We'll fight this. We'll prove you're incompetent. You'll do nothing, I interrupted. Because if you so much as contact me again, those recorded conversations will be sent to every major news outlet in the city, along with the evidence of your attempted murder. Your names will be associated with elder abuse forever. Marcus paused in the doorway, looking back at me with something that might have been regret. Mom, I never wanted it to be like this. Yes, you did, I said sadly. You wanted it exactly like this. You just never thought I'd find out. After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak with the adrenaline crash that followed confrontation. I had done it. I had faced them down, revealed their secrets, and protected myself from their schemes. But as I looked around my beautiful dining room, at the table still set with my best china and the remains of what was supposed to be a celebration, I realized that winning this battle had cost me something I could never get back. I no longer had a son. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my new cottage, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan. The small house I had purchased in Harbor Springs was nothing like the grand suburban home where I had raised Marcus, where Robert and I had built our life together, where I had been slowly poisoned by people who claimed to love me. This place was mine alone. Every choice, from the paint colors to the furniture to the view from my bedroom window, had been made without considering anyone else's needs or opinions. The past half-year had been a whirlwind of changes that would have terrified the woman I was before Africa, but which energized the woman I had become. Selling the family home had been surprisingly easy once I stopped thinking of it as abandoning memories and started seeing it as escaping a prison. Patricia had handled most of the legal details while I focused on deciding what parts of my old life were worth keeping and what needed to be left behind. I kept Robert's photographs and his collection of vintage fishing lures. I kept my grandmother's china and the quilt my mother had made for our wedding. I kept books that had meant something to me personally, not because they looked impressive on shelves designed to impress visitors I no longer wanted to see. Everything else, the furniture chosen to accommodate family gatherings that had become exercises in manipulation, the artwork selected to project success and status, the formal dining room set where I had signed away my freedom thinking I was ensuring my son's future. All of it was sold or donated. The money from the house sale had been substantial, and combined with the careful financial restructuring Patricia and I had implemented, I found myself in the unusual position of being wealthier at 62 than I had been at 32. Without Marcus and Olivia draining my resources through loans and emergencies and elaborate schemes, my money was finally working for me instead of against me. But the real wealth I had gained was harder to quantify. For the first time in 3 years, I woke up each morning without dread. I didn't check my phone nervously for guilt-inducing messages or manipulation disguised as concern. I didn't analyze every word before speaking, trying to avoid saying something that would be used as evidence of my declining mental capacity. I didn't have to justify my purchases, my choices, or my very existence to people who saw me as an obstacle to their desires. The silence in my new life had been unsettling at first. After years of constant emotional noise, the subtle criticisms, the manufactured crises, the endless stream of requests wrapped in expressions of love, the peace felt almost suspicious. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new manipulation or emergency that would pull me back into their orbit. But gradually I learned to trust the silence. I learned to enjoy making decisions without consultation, spending money without justification, and choosing how to fill my days based on what brought me joy, rather than what others expected of me. I had reconnected with Margaret, my friend from the bridge club, who had welcomed me back with tears and no questions asked about the years I had been absent. Through her, I had slowly rebuilt connections with other friends who had been pushed out of my life by people claiming to protect me from their negative influence. "You look different," Margaret had told me during one of our weekly coffee dates. "Younger somehow, but also stronger. What happened to you?" I had considered telling her everything, the safari, the murder plot, the systematic isolation and financial manipulation. But in the end I had simply said, I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonely when I was surrounded by family. Now I'm alone and I've never been happier. The truth was more complicated than that simple explanation, but it contained the essence of what I had discovered about myself and my life. I had spent 3 years being told that I needed protection, guidance, and care, that my independence was dangerous and my judgment was flawed. I had internalized those messages so completely that I had almost forgotten who I was when I wasn't being managed by others. Living alone again had reminded me that I was perfectly capable of managing my own life, making my own decisions, and finding my own happiness. The woman who had been abandoned in African lion country had discovered reserves of strength and resourcefulness that surprised her. The same woman who had survived that experience was more than capable of surviving anything life might throw at her in the future. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent as it had been for months. No calls from Marcus begging forgiveness or demanding explanations. No messages from Olivia threatening legal action or promising revenge. According to Detective Rodriguez, whom I had kept on retainer as a precautionary measure, they had quietly divorced 3 months after our confrontation. The financial pressure of their debts, combined with the loss of their expected windfall, had apparently destroyed whatever genuine affection might have existed between them. Marcus had moved across the country, taking a job with a construction company in Oregon that offered housing as part of the compensation package. His debts had followed him, but he was apparently making an effort to pay them off through honest work rather than elaborate schemes. Rodriguez reported that he seemed to be living quietly, avoiding the gambling that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. Olivia had moved in with her sister in Florida, where she was working as a receptionist at a dental office. The designer clothes and luxury lifestyle were gone, replaced by the kind of ordinary existence she had clearly been trying to escape through her marriage to Marcus. According to social media posts that Rodriguez monitored for me, she was dating a divorced accountant who drove a sensible sedan and took her to chain restaurants for dinner. I felt no satisfaction in their reduced circumstances, but I also felt no guilt. They had made their choices just as I had made mine. The difference was that my choices had been guided by love and trust, while theirs had been motivated by greed and desperation. The consequences they were facing were the natural result of the path they had chosen, not punishment I had inflicted on them. Sometimes, late at night when the lake was perfectly still and the cottage was quiet except for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, I would think about the family dinners we might have had if things had been different. I would imagine grandchildren who might have filled this house with laughter and chaos, holidays that would have created happy memories instead of opportunities for manipulation, a son who would have called to check on me because he loved me rather than because he needed something. But those thoughts no longer brought the crushing sadness they once had. Instead, they reminded me of a truth I had learned too late to save my relationship with Marcus, but not too late to save myself. Love cannot be forced, demanded, or purchased. It either exists naturally or it doesn't exist at all. All the money in the world cannot create genuine affection between people who see each other as means to an end rather than as human beings worthy of respect and care. On this particular morning, 6 months after reclaiming my life, I had a different kind of visitor coming. Margaret was bringing her granddaughter Emma, a college student who had been struggling with financial pressure from her own family, to choose a career path that would make them proud, rather than one that would make her happy. Margaret thought Emma might benefit from talking to someone who had learned the hard way about the difference between family obligation and family love. As I prepared lunch for the three of us, I reflected on how strange it was to be 62 years old, and just beginning to understand what it meant to live authentically. Most people my age were settled into established patterns, comfortable with routines that had been years in the making. Instead, I was discovering new interests, making new friends, and creating a life that reflected who I actually was rather than who others needed me to be. The cottage door opened and Margaret's voice called out, "Susan, we're here." I turned from the stove where I had been stirring soup, a simple tomato basil recipe that I had chosen because I liked it, not because it would impress anyone or meet anyone else's dietary requirements, and smiled at the sound of footsteps and laughter filling my small kitchen. Emma was a lovely girl with serious eyes and an uncertain smile, the same expression I had seen in mirrors during the worst period of my life with Marcus and Olivia. The expression of someone who had been told so often what they should want that they had forgotten how to identify their own desires. "Mrs. Kellerman," she said shyly, "Grandma Margaret told me you might understand what I'm going through with my family." I looked at this young woman, barely 20 years old, already carrying the weight of other people's expectations and demands, and felt a fierce protective instinct that surprised me with its intensity. "Call me Susan," I said warmly. "And yes, I think I understand exactly what you're going through. But more importantly, I think I can help you understand that you have more choices than you realize." As we sat down to lunch, I began telling Emma my story. Not all of it, but the parts that might help her see that family love should never feel like a cage, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your family is to refuse to be controlled by their fears and expectations. Outside, the lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, and I realized that for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about the future. Not because I knew what it would bring, but because I finally trusted myself to handle whatever came next. At 62, I was finally free to become whoever I was meant to be.